It's December 26, 1900. The steamship Hesperus is cutting through the frigid waters off the coast of Scotland, carrying mail and supplies to remote lighthouses scattered across the treacherous North Atlantic. Captain James Harvey has made this journey countless times before, but today something feels wrong. As the ship approaches the Flannan Isles, a cluster of barren, windswept rocks 20 miles west of the Isle of Louis, Captain Harvey peers through his spyglass toward the lighthouse that should be guiding vessels safely through these deadly waters. The lighthouse that should be shining like a beacon of hope in the darkness, but there's no light. The tower stands dark and silent against the gray December sky. Welcome to one of maritime history's most chilling, unsolved mysteries. A mystery that has haunted investigators, spawned countless theories, and continues to baffle experts more than 120 years later. This is the story of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers, who simply vanished. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was no ordinary structure, standing 75 feet tall on the remote island of Eilean Mòr. It was considered one of the most challenging lighthouse postings in all of Scotland. The Northern Lighthouse Board had spent 4 years and an enormous sum of money constructing this vital navigation aid, which finally became operational in December 1899, just 1 year before our story begins. 3 men were assigned to operate this isolated outpost. James Duquette, the principal keeper, a seasoned veteran with over 25 years of lighthouse experience. Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, known for his reliability and steady nerves, and Donald MacArthur, who was supposed to be the third keeper, but had taken leave for the holidays. In his place stood William Ross, an occasional keeper who had volunteered for the Christmas rotation. But wait, I need to correct myself here. The third man wasn't William Ross, it was Donald MacArthur. No, that's not right either. Let me get this straight, because the details matter in a mystery like this. The 3 men stationed at the lighthouse in December 1900 were James Duquette, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, the first assistant, and the occasional keeper who had taken the place of the regular third man was actually Donald MacArthur. But here's where it gets confusing, because historical records show the third man was actually William Ross, and later accounts mention a Donald MacArthur. The inconsistencies in the historical record are part of what makes this mystery so maddening. What we know for certain is this: 3 experienced lighthouse keepers were managing the Flannan Isles Light. These weren't novices. These were men who had spent years, even decades, tending to lighthouses along Scotland's brutal coastline. They knew the sea, they knew the weather, and they knew how dangerous their job could be. The lighthouse itself was a marvel of engineering, built to withstand the most savage Atlantic storms. It featured living quarters for the keepers, a well-stocked supply room, and, most importantly, a massive lens system that could project its warning light up to 24 miles out to sea. This light was literally a matter of life and death for ships navigating these treacherous waters. But on December 15, 1900, something went wrong. Ships passing the Flannan Isles reported that the light was not operational. At first, this wasn't cause for immediate alarm. Lighthouse equipment could malfunction, and keepers were trained to make repairs. But as days passed and the light remained dark, concern grew. This brings us back to Captain Harvey aboard the Hesperus on December 26, when his ship approached the landing area at the base of the lighthouse. Something immediately struck him as odd. No one came down to the landing platform to collect the mail and supply standard procedure that had never been broken before. Harvey ordered his men to sound the ship's horn. The blast echoed off the rocky cliffs, but no response came from the lighthouse above. He tried again. Still nothing. The silence was deafening. Able to land safely due to rough seas, Harvey was forced to continue his journey. But he immediately reported the incident upon reaching his next port. The Northern Lighthouse Board was notified, and they dispatched the relief vessel Hesperus. Wait, no, that was the mail ship. They sent the relief ship Hesperus. Actually, I'm getting the ship names confused. Let me clarify. Captain Harvey was aboard the steamship Hesperus when he first noticed the dark lighthouse. After he reported his concerns, the Northern Lighthouse Board sent relief keeper Joseph Mòr aboard the lighthouse tender Hesperus on December 26, but the seas were too rough to land that day. It wasn't until December 26 that Mòr finally reached the island. As his small boat approached the rocky landing platform, an eerie quiet hung over the entire island. Mòr called out to his colleagues. His voice bounced off the rocks and returned to him as an echo. No human voices answered. Climbing the steep path to the lighthouse, Mòr's unease grew with each step. The lighthouse door was closed but unlocked. Inside, everything appeared normal at first glance. The beds were unmade, as if the keepers had just stepped out. The kitchen showed signs of a meal being prepared. But then Mòr began to notice the details that would become the foundation of this enduring mystery. What Joseph Mòr discovered inside that lighthouse has been debated and analyzed for over a century. Let me walk you through exactly what he found, because these details are crucial to understanding just how strange this disappearance really was. The kitchen table was set for a meal. Not unusual in itself, but the food was still there, cold and untouched. One chair was overturned, lying on its side, as if someone had stood up quickly, or perhaps been startled. The lighthouse log, maintained meticulously by the keepers, showed the last entry was made on December 15th at 9 a.m. That entry, written in Thomas Marshall's handwriting, simply noted routine weather observations. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested impending disaster. But here's where it gets interesting. Mòr noticed that the lighthouse's oil reservoirs were full. The lens was clean, and all the equipment was in perfect working order. There had been a mechanical problem with the light. There was no evidence of it. Keepers hadn't been struggling with equipment failure. They had simply stopped tending the light. In the sleeping quarters, 2 of the 3 beds were made, while 1 remained rumpled. This suggested that whatever happened to the keepers occurred during the day, not at night when they would all have been sleeping. Mòr also found that the keepers' oilskin coats, essential protection against the harsh Atlantic weather, were missing. All 3 men had apparently gone outside, prepared for the elements, but the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Mòr found the lighthouse's emergency protocols had not been followed. In the event of severe weather or emergency, lighthouse keepers were trained to secure certain equipment and follow specific procedures. None of these emergency measures had been implemented. Whatever caused the men to leave the lighthouse had happened suddenly, without warning, and without time for proper preparation. The weather log, normally updated every few hours, showed its last entry on December 15th. The log noted that a severe storm had been approaching, with winds increasing and seas growing rougher throughout the day. The storms were routine for the Flannan Isles. These men had weathered countless gales before. Why would this one be different? The Northern Lighthouse Board launched an immediate investigation. Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived on the island with a team of investigators determined to solve the mystery of the missing keepers. What they discovered only deepened the puzzle. Muirhead's team conducted a thorough search of the entire island. Eilean Mòr is not large, roughly 500 yards long and 150 yards wide, and much of it consists of steep cliffs dropping directly into the Atlantic. There are very few places where a person could go, and even fewer where someone could hide or take shelter. They found no bodies, no signs of violence, no evidence of struggle inside the lighthouse or anywhere on the island. It was as if 3 grown men had simply been erased from existence. The investigators did, however, discover some intriguing evidence around the island's landing platforms. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse had two separate landing areas: the east landing, used during calm weather, and the more sheltered west landing, used when storms made the east landing too dangerous. At the west landing, the investigation team found something disturbing. The landing platform's railings were damaged, and some of the heavy landing equipment, including a toolbox weighing over 100 pounds, had been dislodged and swept away. The damage suggested that massive waves, much larger than normal, had smashed into the supposedly sheltered landing area with tremendous force. But here's the puzzle. According to weather records, while December 15th had indeed been stormy, the conditions weren't exceptionally severe by Flannan Isles standards. The Lighthouse Keepers had weathered far worse storms without incident. So what could have generated waves powerful enough to cause such damage at the West Landing? Mòr had interviewed the relief keeper, Joseph Mòr, extensively. Mòr was certain of what he had observed, but he couldn't explain it. He also interviewed the crew of ships that had passed the Flannan Isles around December 15th. Their accounts were consistent. The lighthouse had gone dark sometime between December 15th and 16th, and they had seen no signs of distress or emergency signals from the island. As news of the disappearance spread, theories began to emerge. Some were logical, others bordered on the supernatural. Let's examine the most compelling explanations that have been proposed over the past 120 years. The most widely accepted explanation involves what maritime experts call a rogue wave, a massive wave, sometimes twice the height of surrounding waves, that can appear without warning, even in moderately rough seas. These waves are now known to be real phenomena, capable of reaching heights of 80 feet or more. Here's how this theory works. On December 15th, the three keepers noticed that the storm was causing unusual wave action around the West Landing. Perhaps equipment was being damaged, or they were concerned about their boat being destroyed. All three men went down to the landing area to secure their equipment or rescue supplies. When they were at the exposed landing platform, a rogue wave much larger than anything they had experienced swept all three men into the sea. This would explain why they were all wearing their oilskins, why they left the lighthouse suddenly, and why there was damage to the West Landing platform. It would also explain why no bodies were ever found. The Atlantic Ocean rarely gives up its victims, especially in winter. But this theory has problems. Lighthouse keepers were trained never to leave their post unmanned, especially during storms. Standard procedure would require at least one keeper to remain in the lighthouse at all times. Why would all three men violate this fundamental safety rule? A variation of the rogue wave theory suggests that perhaps only one keeper initially went to check on the landing platform when he was swept away by a massive wave. One of his colleagues saw what happened and rushed down to attempt a rescue. The third keeper, seeing both his companions in trouble, also ran down to help. In the chaos, all three men were lost to the sea. This theory better explains why all three would be outside the lighthouse simultaneously. Was a rescue attempt gone wrong, not a planned maintenance task. The overturned chair in the kitchen could have been from someone jumping up suddenly upon seeing a colleague in danger. Some investigators have suggested that the keepers might have been murdered by smugglers or pirates who wanted to use the lighthouse island as a base for illegal activities. The remote location and the fact that the lighthouse could be seen for miles would make it an ideal lookout post for criminal operations. However, there's no evidence of violence at the scene, no signs of struggle, and no clear motive for why criminals would want to eliminate lighthouse keepers rather than simply avoiding the area. The Flannan Isles were too remote and too closely monitored by the Lighthouse Service for this theory to be very credible. A darker theory suggests that the isolation and stress of lighthouse keeping might have driven the men to take their own lives. The Flannan Isles posting was known to be particularly challenging, with keepers isolated for weeks at a time in harsh conditions. But again, there's little evidence to support this. The men's personal effects showed no signs of depression or distress. Their families reported no concerns about their mental state, and lighthouse keepers were carefully selected and regularly evaluated for psychological fitness, precisely because of the demanding nature of their work. The disappearance of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers has become one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. It has inspired poems, novels, films, and countless theories. The incident led to significant changes in lighthouse operation procedures, including requirements for more frequent contact with shore stations and improved emergency communication systems. Perhaps most importantly, the mystery reminds us of the incredible dangers faced by the men and women who kept the lights burning along our coasts. Lighthouse keeping was never a safe profession, but it was an essential one. For every ship that safely navigated treacherous waters guided by a lighthouse beam, there were keepers risking their lives in isolation, facing storms, equipment failures, and the constant stress of knowing that mariners depended on them. Today, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse is automated, operated by solar panels and GPS technology. No human keepers are required. The light still warns ships away from the dangerous rocks, but it does so without the human courage and dedication that once made such warnings possible. FDH, examining all the evidence, interviewing countless experts, and considering every theory, what can we conclude about the fate of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur? The most likely explanation remains some version of the rogue wave theory. On December 15, 1900, during a moderate but persistent storm, the three lighthouse keepers became concerned about damage to their landing platform or equipment. Violating standard safety protocols, perhaps because the situation seemed to require immediate action from all three men, they went down to the west, landing together. While attempting to secure equipment or assess storm damage, they were struck by a massive, unpredictable wave generated by the unique underwater topography around the Flannan Isles. All three men were swept into the Atlantic Ocean and drowned. Their bodies were carried away by currents and never recovered. This explanation accounts for most of the physical evidence: the damage to the west landing, the missing oilskins, the sudden abandonment of the lighthouse, and the absence of any bodies or signs of struggle on the island. But it doesn't answer every question. We may never know exactly why all three experienced keepers decided to leave their post simultaneously, or what specific emergency they thought they were responding to. We may never understand why they didn't follow established safety procedures that might have saved at least one of their lives, and perhaps that's appropriate. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, serving as reminders of the vast, unpredictable power of the natural world and the courage of those who face it in service to others. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse still operates today, its automated beam sweeping across the same waters where three men vanished more than 120 years ago. On stormy nights, when the wind howls across the Atlantic and massive waves crash against the rocky shores, perhaps their spirits still tend to light, ensuring that other mariners find safe passage through the darkness. The mystery of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse Keepers may never be fully solved, but their story lives in a testament to the dedication, bravery, and ultimate sacrifice of those who kept the lights burning when darkness threatened to claim everything.